Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm so honored to be having Dr. Rosalind Watts with us, coming to us live from the UK. Hi Ros, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So Dr. Watts is a clinical psychologist and the founder of ACER Integration. Her contributions to the field of psychedelic therapy are numerous and include the development of the ACE model, Accept, Connect, Embody, which has been used in clinical trials of both psilocybin and DMT, as well as the Watts Connectedness Scale, which is a psychometric tool for measuring outcomes of psychedelic therapy. Dr. Watts is the former clinical lead on the psilocybin for depression trial at Imperial College of London and sits on the clinical advisory board of the Usona Institute. So, Dr. Watts, I would love to hear your story. How did you get onto the path of, becoming a researcher and a therapist? And I'm curious, did you used to have a different career, or was this something you just knew you were going to do as a kid?
Oh, thank you. So when I was growing up, I wanted to be a barrister. I wanted to be a human rights barrister because I'm quite kind of argumentative by nature and always like having the last word, my mum would say. So I was always quite kind of outspoken, I would say, and kind of, interested in debates and interested in justice as well, I think. So psychedelic therapy was the last thing I thought I would do, but it is kind of linked in a way, I think, because I ended up working as a clinical psychologist because I changed my mind about being a barrister because I did some work experience with in court. And I was asking all sorts of questions to the barrister that I was apprenticing with about their life story and their history and why they did the things they did. And the barrister said, you need to be a psychologist, not a lawyer, if you're asking all these questions. It's not about why they did it. It's about if they did it. And I was like, yeah, but what about their childhood? Why? Let's go back to the roots of this. So became a psychologist, and then I guess came to psychedelic therapy because of the same thing around kind of justice, really, because I realized that the healthcare systems we have were not fit for purpose. And I was working as a psychologist within this system that was really not effective for most people. And the waiting lists were really long. The methods we had were quite ineffective for many people. And so then when I heard about the psychedelic research into depression, and I had my best friend actually had her own ayahuasca experience to treat her depression, it was like, oh, finally something that actually has the power to bring healing, not just to individuals, but communities. And so the kind of reasons why people might end up committing crimes and end up in prison, maybe we can get there before that happens. Maybe we can bring the healing in at a younger age. So I've kind of come full circle in a way.
Oh, that's incredible. I love that. And now I'm curious about your psychedelic experiences that you've had. Were you already in the psychedelic world and then had the experience, or had you had an experience, a while ago? And I'm curious how it affected the work that you do.
Well, when I was a teenager, I had experiences of the kind of the culture of raving, and, which is not so much, it wasn't psilocybin, but I had a kind of insight into that world, and I saw how, talk about connectedness, it was such an amazing community. There was an absolute sense of people caring for each other, looking out for each other. And it was a beautiful thing to see. It really was. It was kind of the tail end of the 90s. And I think I carried something that with me. Then I kind of went to university and carried on with my kind of career and became a bit more sensible. But then when I was studying my English literature degree, magic mushrooms were legal in the UK for a short while. And I lived above a magic mushroom shop that was called, it was in a city called Birmingham, and the shop was called Amsterdam of London. So very confusing name. But my friends and I would basically do psychedelic therapy with each other at the weekends. We would just put the mushrooms on a pizza, sit around and talk about our mothers. So I had this kind of early experience of university, of like rave culture and mushroom pizza psychedelic therapy with my friends, but it was just this little burst. And then I never really thought of it as something that would be incorporated with my career. I didn't even know that people did MDMA therapy or, psilocybin therapy. But I carried it with me. I never forgot it. I carried with me that memory of it. And then then it was decades later. Well, so that was when I was kind of like, 19, 20. And then when I was 33, I had my daughter and I was on maternity leave. And I suddenly had some time. Clinical psychologists in the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, don't have any time to ever do anything outside of work because you're so exhausted at the end of the day. But I had some time to read papers and read books, and I found out about the psilocybin research. So when I realized that psilocybin was being used in clinical settings, something in my body was like, yes, because I knew from my own experience how beautiful those experiences could be.
Wow. I love that story. And by the way, I was totally part of that whole rave culture in the 90s too. And I think it's funny to look back and say, well, all these recreational drugs really did something, because I saw the same thing. It's like, okay, we all got along. I made good friends just from bumping into them in the bathroom, and that seems to be a huge missing piece in our culture right now, where so many people feel disconnected. They feel alone, even though we're connected, right? Social media and the internet, but everybody's feeling like there's so much depression and anxiety and trauma, and people just desire this need for connection. So I love this story. Thanks for sharing. So I want to get into a little bit of the background around the research that you were doing, because I know little bits and pieces, but I did not know you were part of DMT research, which I find very fascinating, because it seems to have been researched a little less than, say, psilocybin or MDMA. But yeah, what was involved in the research, or what part did you play in the research on psilocybin and DMT?
So varying kind of roles. The first psilocybin, so I've been involved in 3 trials. The first trial was, I was a guide. I was a guide in the sessions. And this was straight after I had my daughter, and I discovered the research, and I was like, I was on maternity leave from my job in the NHS, but I had time to go and volunteer. So I was a volunteer guide. And that role was just fascinating, because it wasn't so pressured. I was just going in to meet the people, the participants on a prep session, sit with them in the psilocybin session, hold their hand, be with them, if they wanted to hold a hand, and then be there in the integration sessions. And it was just a real privilege to really be involved in that kind of way, because I got to really learn and enjoy without there being too much pressure. Then the next trial, I was essentially leading it. So I was on the ground, I recruited the team, trained the team, designed the therapy model, which is the ACE model, Accept, Connect, Embody, and guided lots of people myself. It was a very, very 360 degree kind of, I didn't do the kind of data inputting stuff, but everything else, it was very full on. And that I loved the creative freedom of being able to design the therapy model, but it was incredibly, incredibly high stress and incredibly high pressure. And the hours were very long. We would sometimes guide 2 patients. I would sometimes guide 2 patients in a week. So Monday, preparing the first person, Tuesday, sitting all day with them in the psilocybin session, Wednesday morning, doing integration for the first person, and then Wednesday afternoon, meeting the second person, going straight from integration to prep for the next person, sitting all day the next day. And then by the time Friday came around, I was just an absolute zombie. So that carried on for a year and a half.
Oh my God. Yeah, I want to ask questions about that, because I say there's so many people that glamorize, sitting and being a psychedelic facilitator or underground therapist or above ground. And then there's the reality, which is, you're sitting for hours and hours and hours and hours, right?
My back will never recover from literally just kind of sitting for so many hours. Yeah. I mean, it's really physically demanding when you do.
And you're just sitting there maybe taking notes or.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where I mean, it's also wonderful and a privilege and lovely, but your presence you have to be present, you have to be aware of what's going on, but not too, kind of not intervene too much. And it's just very tiring, like emotionally exhausting. At the end of the day, I think it's the kind of thing where guiding one person every 2 weeks or something would feel for me about the right amount of about the right pace so that I could really be present. But 2 people in a week is that's a kind of Western timescale of conveyor belt. Let's keep going. We can't sully this way of working with the toxic work ethics of our system.
Yeah, and this is interesting because because I agree that there's only so many people you could see in a week. I mean, especially if you're doing, let's say, psilocybin work. But, I've actually done the math on this to make, let's say, what we would call here in the US, maybe like a thriving income or some livable, but not just living wage, but like a thriving wage income. If you do the math, it either means really expensive therapy or cramming people in and charging less, but then potentially getting burnout. And you actually mentioned this as an NHS psychologist, which I have seen just from my own therapy clients over the years, that it's very easy to get burnout, especially when you're, trying to make a decent living. And, you have to see 30 clients a week in order to make, here in America, what we would call a really good salary or good income. Have you seen this over the years, and how do you suggest people deal with this? How are we going to have psychedelic therapists if they only see someone once every 2 weeks,
Well, I feel like we may have to move to 2 different models. I think group work has so many benefits. I mean, in a way, I'm kind of speaking about something that because I always worked in a one patient, 2 guides scenario. But I know that people get a lot from group sessions as well when they're safely held. And I think those become much more kind of sustainable. And if we had some kind of hybrid model where, rather than being in a kind of ceremony where you're left on your own, there's songs in a language that you don't understand, although the shamanic model, it can be incredible, but for some people it's going to be too off-putting and it's not going to resonate with where they're at. And they might find some of the rituals also a little bit scary and spooky, and it's just not going to be for everyone. But if we could have some kind of model where you have, a couple of therapists, a couple of assistants that are learning to be therapists, so they actually, they're apprenticing, so they don't need to be paid very much. In fact, it's their training, so maybe they pay you. I don't know. Maybe we could do it that way, and then, or at least it's just very low pay. But then you have a system where people are in a group, and if somebody really needs support from an individual, there's another room where they can say, I need help. And one of the therapists goes with them, or, one of the therapists and one of the assistants go together, and you provide the individual support for that person at that time. I think that kind of hybrid model of a group, but with the capacity for one-on-one support. And there are just so many ways we can do integration as groups as well, group-based integration, community, grassroots stuff. I think, joining a tree planting group with a load of other people that you've been on this journey with is and you can walk and talk about your process. And as you're planting the trees, doing some exercise, getting out in the world, we can be creative about the kind of modalities that we use, rather than having one person in a room with one therapist, which is always going to be tiring in a way for both parties and expensive for one. And kind of, as you say, it's hard to make a living doing that as well.
Yeah, this will be very interesting to see how it plays out, because I know there's a lot of people who really, just imagine I'm just going to make money by holding space for someone, and I'll just see 5 people a week. And I agree. It's you're going to potentially get burnout very quickly. But this is also why I think a lot of people are turning to, let's say, integration coaching, or a hybrid of maybe doing preparation integration with, maybe less actual medicine, maybe for what they call healthy normals, which I personally hate that term, but we all know what it means. versus someone with like, treatment resistant depression or something. But let's talk about your, you have this ACER program, and, you're teaching people about integration. And I'm curious, what is ACER and how is it different than, let's say, just, a random integration circle that I can find online?
So I always really struggle to describe it because there's kind of so many parts to it. It's like, but I'll do my best to give you the kind of quick summary. So essentially, it's a year-long process that people sign up for, 12 months. And we have cohorts of people. So we have a kind of summer intake and then a kind of winter intake. And when people join, we have this structure of going around the 12 months of the calendar called the 12 trees. And every month we have a different tree, and each tree has a different lesson. And all of the lessons are around either connecting to self, connecting to others, or connecting to nature and the wider world. So, for example, are we still in May? Yeah, we're still in May now when we're having this conversation, although it probably won't be when this goes out there. But right now it's May, and our tree is the Douglas fir, beautiful Douglas fir tree. And the Douglas fir in our community is a metaphor for local community connection, because the Douglas fir in Douglas fir forests, excuse me. I don't know if you've read the book Finding the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard. It's one of the most beautiful books I could ever recommend to anyone. Finding the Mother Tree. It's about trees and forests and the way the forest communicates underneath the ground, the mycelial connection between the trees, these networks of support and reciprocity and care, the way the trees send signals and minerals. But it's really about looking at the old ways of extraction and individualism and kind of corporate growth versus the way of the forest, which is cooperative, interconnected web of life, all working together. And so I could talk about that forever, but I'll try and keep it at that. So the Douglas fir is about the interconnections between the trees of a forest and how we can learn from that. So thinking about where we live, and it's like, who takes my rubbish out? Who makes the bread that I eat? Who are my neighbors? And often we find that a lot of it isn't in our local community, but some of it is. We can go local. We can visit our neighbor. We can start getting products from something local, and we can start projects as well. We can start initiatives. So this month in ACER, we've had lots of people starting little or big things in their local community, even if it's just getting to know the person that gives you your coffee every morning, to say like, hey, what's your name? Just making those connections. So that's May. I won't go through all the trees, but then in June, next month, it's the hawthorn tree, and that's about forgiveness. It's about forgiving the self first, then forgiving other people, and then broadening out that kind of sense of letting go of old hurts. And again, I could talk about that forever, but the way we work on these trees in the community is we have a set process every month. So at the beginning of the month, so like say it was let's say June, hawthorn. So in the first week, everyone receives a film, and that's it's kind of me with hawthorn trees talking about the theme and the psychological underpinnings and research and ideas around forgiveness, but also thinking about the metaphor of the hawthorn tree and the myths around the hawthorn tree and why the hawthorn tree represents, we call it blossoming the thorn, like letting the flower of love be softer and bigger than the spike of fear. So it's like, because in a hawthorn tree, you have all these little spikes, the thorny bits, and then in spring, suddenly these huge white flowers just explode over the thorns. So it's like how we've got the thorns we've got the wrongs that have been done to us and that we've done to others, and we carry them with us. How can we start a process where we allow blossoms to kind of overtake those old resentments? So we have a film where we talk about whatever the theme is, and then through the course of the month, they have lots of different kinds of workshops where they work on that theme together, from breathwork sessions, sharing circles, guided imagery journeys, and they do that process. And then for every month, you go as a community onto the next tree. And the idea is at the end of the 12 months, you've internalized each one of these lessons. You've kind of been each tree. So you have a garden of all those trees. And that every year, when you come around to those months, you go a little bit deeper with that spiral. So next May, you're going to meet another neighbor. And next June, you're going to go a bit deeper with your forgiveness of yourself. So that's basically the process. And what we really hope is that at the end of it, well, what will happen when people finish is that they will be part of a kind of never-ending community of people who are trying to bring connectedness into the world, whether through psychedelics or other means, and support each other and work in our local communities too, and really try and bring in the new way that we want to see, which is collaboration, community, connectedness, and care, rather than, as you said, disconnection, fragmentation, loneliness, the corporate misery that has overtaken our culture.
Oh, it sounds like such a beautiful program. And of course, trees are just pure medicine. I was going to ask, how do you bring in the psychedelic element? I mean, obviously, it's like, to me, everything is psychedelic and you can just tap into their medicine, like you said, forgiveness or learning about the thorns. But yeah, do you bring any kind of psychedelic specifics into this program?
Well, our community is made up mostly of people that have had psychedelic experiences. So they bring it in themselves. So everybody is put in an orchard of 10 people that you go through the whole journey with. So you have the same people. So people bond with each other and share their stories with their orchard, their small group. But also in all the large group sessions, we have discussion of people's processes, which may involve that. But we also have every month, I hold a kind of psychedelic integration group where people come and submit specific questions around psychedelic journeys. And we have guest speakers who are retreat facilitators or researchers or, whole range of people. So yeah, there is a psychedelic kind of current through it, but we didn't want it to be, we wanted to hold the space for people that were interested, but not actually taking psychedelics themselves. So it's just one part of the whole.
Ah, I see. It's beautiful. I love this. And I want to talk about what you mentioned, this connection and community and, really stepping into this world of what we all see as possible, right? Like where we can collaborate, where we can actually not feel that place of disconnection that I think so many have felt. And it's kind of breaking now, right? Like, especially if you're on this medicine path or working with psychedelics. And, you had mentioned that you're going to speak on the BBC about, rescheduling psilocybin there in the UK, and mention also having community models. And community has come up so many times on this podcast because obviously it's like an essential piece of this experience that you have with psychedelics, the connectedness, the connection to nature, the connection to one another, the knowing that we're all one and that we are interconnected. But then you go back to your real life and, a lot of people just fall back to where they are, where they were, and nothing changes and stuck in the grind. What are your views on this community model? Like, what does that really mean? And how, what is your vision for the psychedelic space and how this can go?
Thank you. It's such a lovely question. And it kind of means everything to me now, having been in the research world where it was all about, the medical model and brain scans and questionnaire results, and that was everything. And that was wonderful in many ways. But now, years down the line, what I really believe in is not any molecule. There's no, I love, plant medicines. Thank you, plant medicines. And all plants. Thank you, all plants. But my real belief for change for humanity, which is the part of the ecosystem that needs to change because we're the part that's out of balance. Like everything else in nature's kind of working pretty well, as nature does. There's just one species that's ruining it for everyone. For humanity to change my faith is not in any one substance or plant or molecule. It is in our ability to come together as community and togetherness, and allow those processes of meditation and plant medicines and so many different things to help and amplify that process. But it's the coming together again that will change it, because it's our separateness from each other that is what is making us miserable. And most mental health problems, really, when you like drill down to it, it's like, no wonder so many people are so unhappy, because we're social animals. We're not built to live in these little boxes where we don't have a chance to regularly sit around the fire with a small group of trusted others who we've known for a long time, where we have connection to place, connection to the land, reciprocal networks of care. And yes, there are problems that come with that, and there's conflicts that need to be resolved, but there's a depth to the roots. And we're just all cut off from the roots. We're just living in a completely cut off way. So I think the way community, like I see psychedelic medicine as being absolutely by the community, for the community. It has to be that way. Because I've seen the medical model and the benefits and all the pitfalls and all the complications and all the limitations of that. And I think there'll always be a place for a clinic. Yes, let's have a clinic for sure, where a psychiatrist can deliver very medicalized care for people that want that. Great. But for an awful lot of people, let's have a beautiful center in an area locally that is supported by stakeholders, different stakeholders. We have to be able to find a way of creating this in our communities, and it has to be supported. And perhaps, even supported by some of those people that stand to make so much profit from psychedelics. Maybe they can also give some money back to infrastructure building and community building for other people. Because remember, no one owns these plants. In fact, thinking about mushrooms, Maria Sabina had been happily, through her lineage, providing beautiful psychedelic healing. And then white man Gordon Wasson, the banker, basically takes them. And then we see a whole new era of many good things happening with that, but also the taking of something that belongs to all of us, and synthesizing it and selling it and patenting it. So if we can have community centers where local people with different skill sets who are really good at holding space, they might not necessarily be therapists. They're just the safe people, probably the elders, probably the people that have lived many decades, and maybe they were a nurse for a long time, and now they're just one of those really dependable, trusted, earthy, kind of grounded people. Those are the people that I want to be giving people psychedelics. It's not about what piece of paper you've got. It's about your ability to be a safe pair of hands. And so we can have centers where those people who have proven through their communities over time, they've been known for long enough and trusted for long enough to be the ones that are given the kind of the access to these tools. And then let's let the communities organically and slowly develop mechanisms, support structures. Like, what does this community need to make this safe? Rather than some kind of McDonald's franchise version of it, where it's like, drive through psilocybin therapy, all the money going to a few shareholders whose value system is completely against the value system that we're trying to bring in. I think when you bring psychedelics into the existing system, they don't change the system, they just replicate and mirror it. So we need to change our system so that we're ready to receive psychedelics, because we're like, okay, we've created the community support structures that humans desperately need and can't survive without, that have been taken from us because of the society, the structure of the society we live in. We've brought that back, and now we're ready to introduce plant medicines into that structure. So it's like, for me, it's like community is the only way. Like, there can be other ways too, for sure. We need diversity. But if we do it without that community-driven approach, we're completely missing the point.
Amen. I know I share this exact same sentiment, and I think it's really important. And I'm so glad you're sharing this, because I was talking to you before we got on camera here that this is a common concern for a lot of people in the psychedelic space, is how are we going to get this right to develop models that really are inclusive, and also, the plants, these substances are for everyone. They're not to be just controlled and patented by like 3 companies where now it's, 3 times the amount of money. Yeah. So I'm curious, how do we come to terms with this? Because there is a reality, at least here where I live in the US, from what I've heard, Oregon is now kind of there, meaning like some service centers have opened. And, I don't know too many details, but I have heard that there's, it's like regulated, and regulated and somehow became more expensive. And, you can only get it if you have a license, which costs a certain amount of money. And, it's like this whole ordeal. And then, of course, because of the model where you need someone to sit there for many, many hours, it tends to be very expensive. And of course, it's like people do see the benefit to having this and this movement. But how do we come to terms with trying to get this right? Because I've interviewed people who said, well, we do need some kind of regulation. But then I don't know. I'm like, do we? I don't know. How do you come to terms with this? Like, other than pray? Like, I pray very hard on this.
I was thinking that. I was like, when I really like drill down to it, like my strategy is just like trusting in the unfolding of nature. Yeah. But I think, that, takes time and is often quite messy. There's winters as well as summers. So maybe we just need to go through a few winters. I think it's the ability to learn from our mistakes. So in the clinical research world, there was just so many mistakes that were happening. And I'm sure in the underground world, there are so many mistakes. And in the Oregon service centers, there will be so many mistakes. There will be mistakes everywhere because we do not have a lineage. We are all total new kids on the block here. Our plant medicine using traditions got severed a long time ago. We don't know what we're doing. Like, let's just all admit, like we're learning and we're keen. And actually some of us have had lots more years of some people have many decades of experience, but we don't have the tradition. So we're finding our way. And also when there is a new movement, the pioneering spirit of some of the leaders that bring it in is counter to the kind of groundedness that is needed to hold it safely. So when you have those kind of renegade, revolutionaries running ahead with something new, sometimes that personality type is very bullheaded and convinced of its own rightness. So we need the community, we need the circles of the grandmothers and grandfathers and just each other hearing, learning, being open and sharing. And I think crucially, we need to create a culture where we can share when we do things wrong. Because there's so much, I don't know if you've seen this, but there's so much oh yeah, psychedelics used to be illegal and stigmatized and everyone thought you got flashbacks from acid and it was really bad. But now psychedelics are perfect. They're brilliant. They're going to reset your brain in a minute. They're going to change your life. 10 years of therapy in a day. We need to legalize them right now. It's like, oh no, psychedelics are good now. And because of that storyline, it's like any problems with them, it's like, shh, brush that under the carpet. We're glossy, we're perfect, we don't have issues. So, and I can see why the pendulum has swung so far the other way because of where it was. But in order to kind of grow it, to learn, we have to acknowledge we'll all make mistakes. We need to be open about them. And that those mistakes are going to make us stronger if we can embrace them rather than avoid them. If we avoid them, they will bring down the whole thing.
Oh my God. I've talked about this before about how there's so much, not just in the psychedelic space, but a lot of spiritual spaces, this bypassing of let's pretend that didn't happen and maybe it'll just never happen again. But, I see it as well, what if we have an open discussion and use this as an opportunity for growth and healing? and it's been interesting, and I'm sure you know about all of this or more, but, especially when it comes to sexual misconduct and transgressions, and, we don't have a ethical code of standards right now yet. And even if we did, like, there's no one regulating it. And, to me, it's like humans will be humans. Like, we can't forget that. Every human I know has an ego, whether we like to admit it or not. And, it's like, I don't know if canceling is the answer. I don't know if brushing under the carpet isn't the answer, but, we have to be able to talk about it and learn in order to get this right, because that's the only way we're going to evolve into the right direction. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I've actually talked to a lot of people. Someone I interviewed recently said, "Oh, I just get canceled every time I say something that's maybe a little bit of like something we should talk about," and everybody just like shuts them down, and that's unfortunate, because that's not the point, especially with psychedelics. It's like, we're supposed to be able to open up and have these hard conversations and maybe ground a bit and take it down a few notches. And you had mentioned, this BBC interview you're going on about like slowing it down a little bit. And I've actually talked to a bunch of people over the years about like, well, this is moving very fast and maybe it's not always a positive thing. Maybe there's a way to actually like get this growing sustainably. Yeah, what are your views on this idea of slowing down? And do you think it's possible that we can get like large venture capitalists to slow down?
It's a very good point. I don't believe, I sadly don't have much hope for being able to, because, the speed at which, when profit runs the game, and when written into the constitution of those companies is the legal obligation to maximize profit, then there is no slowing down. So, I mean, that's why we're hurtling as a species to the edge of a cliff in a van with no brakes, because it's written into the rules of the van that there can be no brakes. So it's like, I suppose, I just wonder whether there will be two separate movements, really, and that as the kind of, the grassroots movements will spring up, more community-based, I suppose, as psychedelics become more accepted and they're used for in the kind of medical model way, and it's understood by more and more people that they're relatively benign and safe when used carefully and properly, that there will just be kind of self-organizing groups of people, and many of them will go wrong, and many of the corporate offerings will go wrong, and there will be harms done, and there will be boundaries broken, and there will be, psychedelics are such powerful amplifiers. The work can be so messy and confusing, and the potential for, people are so vulnerable in that space, the potential for so many things, it felt like a high risk sport doing that trial. And at the end of it, I was like, I was so glad that we were all okay. It's like, everyone's okay. And lots of people really benefited. It was like hair raising. And often just not knowing what to do in when something really intense happens, just not knowing how to respond, and then people going and not having any support afterwards. It's like, it's hair raising. So bad stuff will happen for sure. But I do also think that we're starting now, at least, to understand that we need to develop a tradition, and we need to develop good infrastructure and good systems of, ethical regulation. I do think we need that as well. And definitely slowing down. But I think, that all we can really do is start to form connections with the people we really trust. Find the others, find the people that have the same ethical framework as you, good skills, don't work about their competency level, and crucially, are interested in plant medicine because they believe that healing is needed and that is the route to healing. And that they are, one, very tiny part of that healing, and that they will make lots of mistakes, and that they're humble enough to recognize those mistakes, rather than I am a goddess and I'm here to save everyone, or I'm going to make loads of money out of this, or, power, I'm going to get powerful, I'm going to be popular, I'm going to be a rock star, status cool. Like, there's so much social status that can come from being involved in this world. The psychedelic conferences are like, it's like, is that Glastonbury Festival, or is that a conference? Because it's like, so find the people you resonate with and you trust, and gently start working with them. Not with psychedelics, like, or you can if but start a local community meditation group, or just start doing a tree planting group or a litter pick. Like, find connections of people and do something nice together, and see how well you work together, and build those connections, and more people join, and slowly you build a network of people that you really trust and know. And then you've got your mycelial network, you've got your little forest. And then when plant medicines become truly accessible, you're like, okay, well, we've got our little corner of the world. We don't know what those guys over there are doing, but we've got our little corner, and we know that we can work well together. And we found a way of doing it in a way that's, accessible and sustainable, and just little groups of people doing it their own way, I think. But crucially, with that other people that it's all about having a good team, like a team of people that you trust. And it's hard in the psychedelics world because there is so much, it's hard to find the stability of a gentle, grounded team, because it's a highly charged environment and there's high stakes and high prizes. So it's hard to find. But when you find your real allies, then that's the kind of slowing down we need. It's the relationship building. Because otherwise, these teams, these alliances form super fast. It's like, oh, I'm starting a clinic. I need a psychiatrist. I need some therapists. I need this. I need this. I need a website designer. Right, everyone come. And you have this like rag-bag team of people that are all like, oh, this is going to be amazing. And they're all doing their own psychedelic journeys, and, no one knows each other. And then stress comes into the system and the team just fragments, and you have lots of conflict. And it's because it was a team that was brought together through intentions of like the next big thing, and they didn't have the relational security of trust, of long-term relationships to actually safeguard their working collaboration.
It's so good that you point that out, because I think a lot of people don't even recognize that. And you mentioned this, people who feel in a place of power. I'm the one healing, like the kind of the ego-driven way of getting into this. This is what I say to my clients. I'm like, you always have to come back to like, why do you even want to do this? Why are you on this path? And are you really being of service, or is there something in you that just, whatever, wants to be loved or wants to hold that position of power so people look up to you? It's like doing the really deep work to constantly keep yourself in check, especially if you're holding that space as a facilitator. I mean, I've already heard, and I'm sure you have as well, so many horror stories, even therapists, like they end up dating their clients and, cross that boundary, very quickly. And I mean, I've now numerous. And, it's an interesting world. And I keep saying like, we might have to see some nightmares, to figure out how to get certain ethics in place and do this from a real place of healing. And like you said, like relationship in this community that's aligned, One question I had for you, because this has come up so much, there's a lot of people that want to, let's say, step into the path of psychedelic integration coach. And there's training programs out there, but let's say they've been on this path for a long time, or they've had a fair amount of experience, and maybe they've done a lot of other spiritual work or their own healing, or they're, regular meditators and so on. And you had mentioned that, this grand vision of maybe sitting with people that are just experienced versus people that maybe have all the training. Because this is something I've argued, is that training, especially some of these trainings, are very brain-based. They're not really teaching you how to actually, have the experience of holding space or working with other human beings, but it's like book based. What do you think of that, especially if it's someone who just wants to go into, let's say, psychedelic integration coaching or some form of coaching that doesn't involve giving anyone psychedelics? Like, what are your views on having a certain level of training versus, other embodied experiences?
I think that's where community checks and balances come into place, because for me, it's really not so much about the specific training. It's about the way of being of the person. So when I think about, like, if I was going to convince my mom to have a psychedelic therapy session, which she's never going to do. I've tried, like, please, she's never going to say yes to that. If she said yes to it one day and I was trying to think of who I wanted to be with her, it would not necessarily be somebody that had done this training or that training or had this qualification or that. I would choose the person with the kindest heart, the most patience, the most experience, and most able to, and who'd seen a lot of different things, the experience and depth of kind of, integrity and kindness. So those are the things, and we'd probably all choose the same people. Like, if you filled a room with like 100 people, there would be some people, and we all had to like choose who we wanted to be our sitter. There would just be some people that have so much experience and a real way of being that you just feel safe with them, and you'd be like, I want to sit with that lady, I want to be in her room. And there would be some people that we'd like really not feel comfortable with. And then if you look to see which one of them had this qualification or that qualification, like, it would not tally. Like, there's no rule to say that all the ones we thought were the best were the psychiatrists at all. It might be that the one we felt really safe with had been an artist or a carer, or all sorts of different things. So I think, but having said that, because we don't have communities where we get to know each other in checks and balances and almost like get to vet each other and know who like the local kind, safe person is, we have to use other ways of like vetting. So the thing about therapy training, they're so variable, but like my clinical psychology training, for example, I didn't learn anything in the actual course. I did 3 years, all the content of the stuff I learned, never going to use any of it. It was all cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm never going to do it. So many manuals and textbooks of stuff that I literally never even, like, did the exam, closed the book, never to be opened again. The only thing that my training course really did was provide a vetting service of me as a human being. Because over those 3 years, I had many, many, many different people check me, observe my tapes, listen to what my supervisor said, ask the clients for feedback. I was just like double, triple, quadruple vetted for 3 years. And at the end of that 3 years, I didn't learn anything about how I wanted to work. But it was like, I could say to people, I've been like proven to be safe. I'm not going to do anything. Well, you can't prove, there's never any total guarantees. But so I feel like what we need is some way of real deep community vetting to make sure someone hasn't broken boundaries or, committed some kind of ethical, but they don't have to be therapists. So that's going to be one of those new things that psychedelics are going to call us to create, because we definitely can't just limit this to therapists. And we're going to need real diverse teams of people offering this. And we're going to need to find those really safe pairs of hands in all sorts of different places. But we do need to vet them. And we do need to vet people for intention, power intention versus genuine care intention. So I don't know how we do that vetting, but we need to find a way, I think.
Thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I agree. And it's interesting. There's like a group I'm in that's just a whole bunch of facilitators. And I'm like, how do you guys refer each other if you don't actually know each other? Like, it's kind of weird. I don't participate. I just kind of glance, and it's, that's where I feel like it's a Wild West, because they're just looking for someone anywhere in this one region, and that's how it goes, is like by location. And then of course there's no responsibility if you recommend someone that doesn't turn out to be any good or even causes harm. So very interesting world. We'll see what happens, but I'm glad you're doing this beautiful community work with your integration cycle and, speaking about this, because I think this is important. And yes, like, keep causing trouble, please. So we're talking about going on the news, and I'm like, yeah, cause some trouble.
Yeah. And being very outspoken, which is, does get me into trouble sometimes, but I can't change it. So,
are you a Sagittarius?
I'm not. I'm actually a Libra. Are you a Sagittarius?
Yes, because we're known for just being honest, honest and outspoken people. So I get it.
I should be a Sagittarius. I need to check. Although I was actually born when my mum said I was born.
Well, let's get into what you have coming up. Tell people about your work that's, next time your cycle is open, what you have planned for the next 6 to 12 months. Is there anything that we want to know about to keep an eye on and on the lookout for?
So we're going to have the next people will start in kind of October time. So we'll be taking applications from now, people can apply anytime via the website. So it's ACER Integration, www.acerintegration.com. And there's a button on there where you can join the wait list, which is actually a mailing list. And my colleague and I, so we're a team of 2. Then we have all of our facilitators because, that's the other thing I didn't say. As part of the process, we go through the 12 trees and we have lots of sharing circles to talk about the work that we're doing and different aspects of the process. And they're facilitated, but they're facilitated by people that have graduated from the 12 trees. So once you've been through the 12 trees, you can become a facilitator for the next people coming on board. So, so we have the team is me and Lee is my kind of wing woman. She does basically everything. She's fantastic. And then we have a team of facilitators who did the first version of ACER, graduated, and are now facilitators themselves, and they hold space for our current community. So it's a small team. But we do a kind of podcasty thing, me and Lee, where we talk through what the month has been like, what it's been like on ACER, and that gets sent to our mailing list. So if people click on that button on the website, they'll get a monthly little podcast of us chatting about what we did in the community that month. And we also are doing free webinars coming up now every month, which is a guided imagery journey and a chance to talk through some things and have a sharing circle to give people a taster of what it's like in the community. So you can look out for those. But if people sign up to the wait list, then they'll automatically be sent all this information.
Beautiful. Oh, that sounds amazing. Well, I'll be sure to sign up, and we'll have your links right here in the show notes so everybody can keep an eye on it and hear all about it. But Dr. Watts, Roz, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your unique medicine with the world. And, I, as someone who feels very similar to you, I'm like, please speak more publicly about this. I think it's a really important message. And I know a lot of people share the same sentiment. And, we all have prayers that this psychedelic space really grows in the right direction because, there's big stakes, big things at stake for the planet.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Beth. It's lovely to chat with you. Thank you for having me.